Well, I'm not going to primarily talk about microgrids and district energy and how wonderful they are, because I know you know all that, and you could probably teach me a thing or two or three or four. What I thought I would do is start with a very brief FERC update, and then talk about some of the broad trends I see, and try to think about how this burgeoning, although already large, microgrid industry and phenomena fits into and supports those trends. As Rob said, I've been at FERC for 8 years, which is not long for a real job, but it's long for a government job lately. I was there for 6 years of the Obama administration, and I've been there for 2 years since President Trump was elected, and I've obviously seen a lot of change in the commission, in the composition of the commission. In case it's not a household name to anyone, FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We oversee interstate energy infrastructure, transmission lines, gas and oil pipelines, hydroelectric facilities, liquefied natural gas export and import, as well as wholesale markets and wholesale electric and gas rates. We are independent. We're an independent agency, not part of any, we're loosely affiliated with the Department of Energy, but we're an independent agency made up of, when we're fully staffed, 5 individual presidential appointees, of whom no more than 3 can be from the president's party. So we're bipartisan by design, and generally quite bipartisan in operation as well. Right now, we'd gotten down to, I was the only commissioner a year and a half ago. Then I was very happy when we got 4 new colleagues. One of them, Rob Powelson, left in August, and so we have now an open seat. We only have 4 commissioners, and we have a nominee from the Department of Energy, Bernard McNamee, who's having a hearing in November to fill the empty seat. And also, rather sadly, very sadly, last week, it was announced that our chairman, Kevin McIntyre, is stepping down as chairman for health reasons, and he will be replaced by Neil Chatterjee, who was chairman for part of 2017, who became chairman Friday, I believe. So a lot of change there. Rob alluded to the transformation and paradigm that's going on in the energy world, and during the time I've been at FERC, the tremendous changes that are happening in the nation's energy mix have really shaped most of our work on both the market side, reliability side, and the infrastructure side. Of course, that change is driven by 3 main phenomena. One is the tremendous growth in the availability and affordability of domestic natural gas with all the new fracking and other extractive technologies. I'm old enough to remember when we thought we was illegal to burn gas in a power plant. We were running out of gas. Now every time you read a study, it's like they've added another 100 years to the reserves, it seems. The second is the growth in renewable and demand-side technologies, both central station and distributed, powered by policy as well as technological changes and customer choice. And the third is the growing recognition of the environmental impact of energy use and delivery, especially the growing recognition of climate issues. And that's contributing to an almost unprecedented upheaval in resources. Even though we moved in many parts of the country to a market system 20 years ago, mostly the markets dispatched and deployed resources that had been there before. But now with the tremendous growth of gas and renewables and demand side, we're really asking the markets to deal with a different resource mix. And those resources, the new ones, are different in their cost characteristics. Some of them, all the money's up front and then zero marginal cost. In their operating characteristics, because some of them are variable rather than turn on and off. And in their geography, because some are location constrained, than the resources that dominated American energy in the 20th century. And those adaptations are being felt all around the country, but they're being felt in different ways because of the very complex ecosystem we've built to regulate and oversee energy in this country. There's FERC, which is the economic regulator, and EPA, the environmental regulator at the federal level, but we also have parallel organizations in all 50 states that work on generation as well as the local distribution. and a mix of public and private power, and different ownership structures, and then different regulatory structures. So more than 2/3 of the nation is in some form of competitive wholesale market, but the eastern markets, ISO New England, New York ISO, and PJM, are overlay states that in large measure have deregulated at the retail level and have used the markets, capacity markets or other resource adequacy structures to plan forward resources, whereas MISO, SPP, and California ISO in different ways still rely on the states more for resource adequacy. So you have very different structures, and the changes are being felt in different ways in different places. So before I kind of talk about how microgrids fit in to that, I did want to say a couple words on the benefits of microgrids that are well known to this group. But obviously, their day job is providing energy, keeping the lights on, providing hot water, steam, cold water, whatever users need. But they help reduce costs, improve the operation and stability of the regional grid, help integrate combined heat and power, thermal and electric storage, advanced system and buildings controls, help reduce grid congestion and shape peak loads, which I'll come on to later. They can offer grid services, energy capacity, and a variety of ancillary services. And they have emergency utilization as places of refuge or just to keep the lights on for their customers. So they have many capabilities just standing alone in their own right. But what I really see now is that those capabilities, this set of technologies, because that's what they all are by definition, you're gridding something together, albeit on a micro level, these different technologies that you're all deploying, I think are particularly well adapted for some of the challenges that we're seeing right now. And so the first that I'll come on to is the changes in the resource mix. And I frequently say, and it seems quite apt in this audience, that there are two big forces pulling at each other right now. And the first is greater regionalization of energy. We see, I just came back from Arizona, where they're in the middle of trying to figure out how they can run the non-California West as more of a combined market. Because of the location-constrained renewables and the different circumstances of different regions, and the ability to deploy resources over a broader geography is very good for customers, particularly with the changes in resource mix. I mean, we used to see you just build a power plant an hour from a city, build a wire to the city, maybe an extension cord to the next city, and that was your need. But now, where we have so many different resources, operating and sharing over broader geography makes a tremendous amount of sense, and we've seen that with the growth of the Mid-Continent ISO, the growth of the Southwest Power Pool, the energy independence market in the West that has more than half of the load in the West in it, or will be in 2019, and more coming on. But the countervailing force in tension with the regionalization is the localization or miniaturization of energy. With customers making unique choices, with more distributed resources that can collectively operate in the same way as central station resources. This is something we talked a lot about actually in the 80s and early 90s with the early fuel cells. There was going to be like a power plant in every neighborhood, but it kind of never happened then. We just went along with the central station resources. But the critical mass driven by not just the combined heat and power that's been there for a while, but the distributed solar, the distributed storage, and the new ways in which the markets are calling for resources has really made it feel like this localization is a substantial trend with customers making different choices, and it's like very much in tension with the regional trend. And there are some people who think, well, maybe we shouldn't invest in transmission anymore because we won't be needing it because everything's going to be more, distributed. That is not my belief. I think I'm sure we'll need a grid as long as I'm alive, and that's really as far as I care. No, that's not true. Now that I have a granddaughter, I actually care beyond. But I think we will need a grid, and in fact, some of these local microgrids and district energy and so forth are in many ways complementary, and are supported by the existence of the regional markets. So I think we're going to be operating in a phenomenon where these are both at play for a long time. But it's fairly self-evident to explain why the microgrids work on a local level. That's what they are. But they also very much help support the markets the whole history of kind of markets has been taking something we used to just think of as a hunk, electricity. Maybe we thought of capacity, like on peak. We thought a coincident peak, and stretching it into all the products, energy and capacity and ancillary services and black start and frequency regulation and frequency response and all these different things. And a lot of the distributed microgrids and district energy plans have the ability to provide some of those, sometimes at much lower cost than the central station resources, which were being ramped down or run in an inefficient way to help keep the grid together. And so they're very much a part of the larger regional scene. A lot of the work at FERC over the last several years has been as new types of resources, as either new ancillary services seem to be needed or new types of resources come on, trying to make sure that the markets stay just and reasonable, either through making sure that resources are paid what they deserve through, like the Order 745, the demand response rule, Order 755, the frequency regulation that paid more for faster frequency regulation, or approving market tariffs that help compensate what the markets need, like the ramping tariffs in the Midwest and California, or requiring frequency response to be provided, to kind of look out and see what the grid needs and how we can use the markets in a fair way to provide it, rather than just assume we'll get it where we always got it. Right now, a lot of that action is around storage. And I mean, I've never met anyone who says, like, energy storage is going away, it's not the trend of the future, and I don't like it. Everyone thinks it's going to be a big part of the future, but it's turning out, as we work on it, a little harder to figure out how to use it and pay it than we realized, because it's actually, I think in the future we might think of it as its own type of energy. You know, distribution, transmission, generation, and storage is a separate thing, not just something that can do what the others do. Under my predecessor as chairman, Norman Bay, the commission made a lot of progress on storage, and last February, in Order 841, we voted out new rules requiring all of the organized market operators to allow storage to bid in and participate for any service it was technically able to provide. No, like, if your storage you have to bid as this, but the generation gets to bid as other things. The market operator is supposed to change the rules to make everything open to storage that it can provide. That sounds easy. It's figuring out how many different things it can provide at one time and who gets the money. Where the hard part of that rule is, and we had a 2-day technical conference, is on distributed storage and distributed energy resources of all kinds, like distributed solar. Because what we're struggling with is, it seems quite clear that distributed resources can be aggregated and bid into the market and contribute great value. But since they're, in many cases, behind the meter, what do the states figure out? Who gets the first bite of the value? Do the states get the first bite of the value? Does the wholesale market get the first bite of the value? How are we going to figure out who pays what to whom in a sensible way? I think our staff has made a lot of progress in thinking about it. I think it can be worked through, but it's a little more complicated than some of the money issues we usually deal with, because of the number of different uses, and because although it acts wholesale when we see it in the markets, it's actually at the distribution level. The second big issue is the coordination, and this is something you probably could teach me a lot about, but as we start calling for those distributed resources, how do you figure out what does the local distribution control center have to know about what's being deployed to make sure nobody's working on the line or making sure the feeders are in place, because the distribution systems, I know, are so dynamic, and that's the other big piece we're grappling with. So I would say watch this space. We're very much working on that, and I know that what we do may have implications for you because you are distributed energy resources, among other things. Second big phenomenon that's shaping a lot of our energy are the environmental pressures. And they're making themselves felt in federal policy with tax credits and the like, but increasingly since the 2016 election in state policy. Since the federal government took a step back from direct regulation of climate impacts and is looking to reassess even some of the core environmental rules that were in place. What we've seen is more and more action at the state level to set carbon targets. I believe more than half the states have carbon targets, some of them binding, and to create their own programs and buy their own resources or subsidized resources they already have to meet those programs. And we're even seeing action at the company level. I won't name the company, but I was with a company that I do not think of as being the forward-looking environmental green leading company, just really influenced by the fact that Amazon was looking to locate in places that had more clean energy. And we're seeing more and more corporate searches from data centers. And I actually left the conference I was at when they were talking about Bitcoin to work on this speech. So I still don't know anything about Bitcoin, but I understand it's a huge load center. So data centers and Bitcoin and even manufacturing facilities making green a part of what they want when they go out. Those are all driving people to think about the climate profile. And that's where the microgrid and the combined heat and power have so much they can offer, because by using whatever you're using to make electricity so much more fully and completely to both make electricity or then make steam or hot water and store in the form of cold water, you can reduce the direct environmental impacts of whatever energy services you're providing, but also have the flexibility to shape the loads so that the most climate or other environmentally damaging resources won't be needed, because you'll reduce those peaks when they were needed, and also actually help the people you work with to shape their loads, because you're right there at the local level actually flipping the switches that people can see. And so now I have to look back at my speech that I'm going to use Princeton as an example. Since the Energy Master Plan was established 10 years ago, they've reduced 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide through the operation of their microgrid, while saving $6 million a year. So that kind of defies the concept that if you're going to do it cleaner, it's going to cost more money. If you do it carefully, maybe not. And the ability, the microgrids are well positioned to take in whatever the new resources are, whether it's rooftop solar, which, by the way, I found out it has a much higher capacity factor in Arizona, because did you know it didn't snow there? I mean, I kind of knew that, but I never really thought through what it meant for solar until I actually saw the numbers. I mean, I knew they had a lot of solar there, but I'm talking even the distributed solar, very different in different places, but often shaped by policy as well as weather. As well, and as the storage technologies, the lithium batteries, and some of the other new, some of the storage technologies are very old, like storing hot and cold stuff so that you can use it later. That's about as old as, we did that even during the wood fire days. But also, and pump storage, but the new batteries and flywheels and compressed air and gravity storage and all that the microgrids are kind of set up to already be positioned to use that quickly as those technologies come along. The third big trend that I think this industry and this field that you're in can help with is resilience and security. I don't think until a year ago I used the word resilience with respect to energy more than once a month. And now it's like in every speech, it's become a new thing we talk about. But I don't think that was because we didn't care about resilience. I think it's just developed a secondary meaning. We are definitely more concerned than ever about the security and resilience of the grid, because it's a less secure world, because some of the changes of the resources we have might make it more complicated to do things than before, and we have to make sure we do it right, otherwise known as fuel security, often exaggerated, but that doesn't mean it's not a thing in some places. And because with climate change or whatever other phenomenon, there's absolutely no question we're seeing more major storms and more natural disasters and more 500-year storms every year, or whatever, that the microgrids are very, very well positioned to help in that. And I think I first heard it, we were having a technical conference at FERC maybe at least 5 years ago on mercury and air toxics. And my former colleague, John Norris, said, we're going about this all wrong. We should be using more batteries and microgrids and all. That's how we're going to keep things reliable. And it was like an aha moment for me. My first thought was like, why did he bring that up? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But then I realized, no, actually that has everything to do with what we're talking about. I just need to put my head in a different, move my brain in a different space. And since that time, that has become a much more familiar concept that it's well known. Princeton got national attention during Superstorm Sandy for islanding and keeping the lights on and being a place of refuge for the first providers over a wide geographic area. But we've seen that again and again during major events, prisons, hospitals, military bases, universities that have thousands of students on campus don't get to just go away. People still expect them to stay on, and they have tremendous resilience benefits. But those benefits are complemented by the fact the rest of the time they're not islanded. They're in the grid until we need them to be islanded. So I think that, I also think that some of the a lot of the debate around resilience has become a debate on the increasing difficulty that some, not all by any stretch of the baseload units, have competing with the gas and renewable technologies. And it's been framed as a debate on whether those new technologies are secure, which I'm not saying that there certainly can be, if we rely on fact, actual instances where there's multiple things dependent on a particular pipeline that is very vulnerable to a particular loss of an element. But there's also a complicated, I call it spaghetti on a plate, of people's commercial interests and policy interests and fuel choices and all scrambled together as we debate about what to do about this. But when you start to really identify what are the real things we're worried about? Is it starting again after a storm? Is it black start? Because a microgrid can help with that. Is it having to shed load quickly so that you don't destabilize a region? Because a microgrid can help with that. Is it fast start? If things are very dynamic, a microgrid can help with that. And I think as we start to really parse what those attributes are, even with more precision than we have before, of how to keep the lights on, I think the distributed district energy and microgrid technologies can be tremendous contributors. But they also have their own security responsibilities to keep themselves cyber secure and physically secure and available to the people who use them. Now I'll look back and see if I forgot what I didn't say. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions, but when I was thinking about this, the word microgrid, I don't know when I first heard the word microgrid, but I don't think it was more than 10 years ago. It was definitely only a few years ago that developed cachet. But when I was at Ropes and Gray, which was from 1978 to 1986, so that was a while ago. The partner I was working for was working on MATEP, the Medical Area Total Energy Plant, which was this new idea to put all the hospitals used together and build them their own power plant in the early PERPA days. I remember Roger Moore, the late Roger Moore, saying it was like gestating an elephant. And that was a microgrid. But it was extremely hard to convince the electric companies and all, but that was an early first, that was probably before microgrid 1.0. That was like microgrid negative 2.0, but that was a microgrid. When I was at the electric company, I don't think I ever used the word microgrid, never passed my lips. But as we had Putnam and Fidelity and Digital and all those move onto our service territory on 495, they wanted duplicate substations and duplicate feeders and weather stations and power quality machines to make sure that we didn't mess up their power, and their own little generating unit, which we were like, well, that's a bit obnoxious. We're the electric company. Why do they need that stuff? But they were indeed building microgrids, and now we're seeing that even more. I was on a hospital board, and this was just a part of operation. You don't want to have someone open on the table and lose your power. So that's just a part of every major medical center that we never called it a microgrid, but it was there. And certainly at FERC, the concept of the contribution of deployed resources has now become very much front and center in a lot of the things we're working on. So I don't think, I'm not one of those people who thinks everyone will have a microgrid, no one will use the grid, everyone will have their own generator in their garage, and that's just it. But I think that, you know, Yogi Berra never make predictions, especially about the future. It does seem that as you refine what you're doing and find new synergistic ways to use, you know, the customer's load that you're serving and the heating and cooling and the increasingly complex energy management systems that link it all together, the applications will grow from the obvious, the island or the military base, to the less obvious places where there's just a lot of load together with different needs that you can work together. And so I think you're very well positioned to help us in a lot of ways, and I have high hopes for the future of this sector, and I would like to take your questions on anything, but particularly what we may be doing or not doing that's messing up those high hopes. Thank you very much.